Hey, everybody. This is Jay, flying solo for the moment. I'm recording this preface to this episode, or what would probably be most accurately described as an episode lit, because this is something a little bit different from what we've done in the past. We don't typically hit on current events. And typically, what we talk about, obviously, as you all know, is very much the polar opposite of current events. But on the episode we recorded yesterday, we did hit on something that's in the zeitgeist at the moment. And rather than waiting for that episode to drop in about a week and a half, we figured we would extract the section of it that is sort of very current event focused. And the current event we discuss is the interview that probably at least some of you, if not most of you, have heard about, which is Tucker Carlson's interview with Darryl Cooper, also known as MartyrMade. And we don't really address the interview itself per se, but we address some old tweets of Cooper's that were dug up that address his thoughts, or probably someone else's regurgitated thoughts, about the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. And so, like I said, rather than waiting for a week and a half for that episode to come out, we figured we would put out just the first section of our discussion so that you could get it sooner and be empowered to be able to fully rebut any nonsense that you see online around the slanderous accusations that Cooper makes on the relationship between Jews and Christians in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and all that good stuff. So anyway, we hope you enjoy, and you'll get that full episode in, like I said, about a week and a half. But hope you enjoy this part of it. Thanks. So this week, for the cultural section, we're going to talk about the topic of Jewish sects from around the Second Temple period, and that sort of that fissure that occurred in Judaism around that time period. But before we get to that discussion, there was another thing that came up this week that actually, time period wise, it actually ties into this discussion. So I thought I would start with some social media current event stuff, which we don't typically hit on this show.
Yeah.
So
we should have the anti-Semite of the week.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Well, here we go.
Every week we should have.
This will be the inaugural
one person. This is the anti-Semite of the week award.
This will be the inaugural
episode. Yeah.
Right.
So for I'll just kind of give a quick summary here. So for the very not online people, this week Tucker Carlson interviewed a guy named Darryl Cooper, who goes by MartyrMade, and he's an amateur historian who I'd actually listened to for a long time and read his Substack and actually subscribed to his Substack for a while. And he's an interesting guy. I think my opinions changed of him dramatically, especially in the last week, but over the last year, certainly since October 7th, it's changed quite a bit. But he's indisputably a great storyteller, and he knows how to tell he knows how to weave a story together for people. And so he was on Tucker Carlson this week. And one other thing I'll say, just as a side note, and I made this comment in our chat group this week. He has a very long multi-part podcast about the history of the Israel-Palestinian relations, that if you go online, you'll hear a lot about it because it's very popular amongst a certain set of people. And I listened to the first episode maybe 6 months ago, and the first episode was so riddled with inaccuracies, and not small things, but like major inaccuracies that it's and I look, I am not an expert on the conflict or the region or anything else. I'm very amateur in all of that, at best amateur. And it was even clear to me the things he was saying in the episode about specifically Herzl's idea about the founding of Israel were so fundamentally misguided. He clearly never read the source material. It was very obvious. But anyway, And I have maybe in the Substack, I'll kind of put my summary together because I have a ton of quotes from her, so that directly contradicts all the stuff he's saying about him.
Yeah,
but that aside, so he went on. So this is a very long intro. He went on Tucker Carlson's podcast and essentially made the case for why the real bad guy in World War II was Winston Churchill, and how Hitler didn't want war with the French and the British, and he wanted peace, and they wouldn't give him peace, and it was just sheer nonsense. And if you go online, maybe I'll put this in the podcast in the Substack too. There's a bunch of people like Victor Davis Hanson and Neil Ferguson have written very powerful rejoinders to everything he was saying, because the guy's just a total buffoon. But after that, people were pulling up old tweets of his about a variety of things, but there's a bunch about the relationship between Christianity and Judaism, if you will. And there was one that I read that I wanted to get the rabbi's thoughts on, if he has any thoughts. So on this, I should say, if he chooses to comment. You're talking to a Jewish rabbi; he has thoughts, but thoughts. I'll see if he wants to comment. Yeah, exactly.
Many thoughts.
So it starts off with some woman I don't know saying, her original tweet is, to Christians who bash Israel, Israelis, and Judaism, Christianity is rooted in Judaism, and our Lord is Jewish. Right. So yeah, that's right.
Simple.
So he comes back with it's a little bit of a long tweet, but I'll read the whole thing. And there's a section I want to ask you about specifically. He says, the coming of the Messiah fulfilled the Jews' special purpose in the world. They were invited into the new covenant, but were jealous of their chosenness and too resentful over their historic defeats to accept equality under God with Gentiles. So they were cast out, and the Israelite religion disappeared from the world forever in 70 AD, when its leprous second temple was destroyed. The covenant passed to those who accepted the invitation. Christianity is not rooted in Judaism, it overcame it. Those who reject Christ rejected the covenant and God himself. The gospel and the epistles couldn't possibly be clearer about this. So obviously there's a lot. So there's a lot. There's a lot.
This is not original. This is not his thoughts.
I'm sure not. That doesn't surprise me at all. That doesn't surprise me at all.
This is absolutely not original. This is taken straight from the early church fathers, and this is what they argued all the time.
Yeah.
That, there was a break in the covenant, the Jews were rejected, we are now the children of the devil, and we had an opportunity and we passed it by. So this is the old time argument against because they had a huge problem, the early Christians. I mean, if Jesus was here to save the world, how come the vast majority of Jews didn't accept him?
Right.
I mean, if this is real, I mean, maybe it was a small Jewish church early on while Jesus was alive, but certainly faded and disappeared after the crucifixion. And certainly after the destruction of the temple, there was no more Jewish church. It turned into a completely Gentile church. Mm-hmm. So to answer this question of why, if you saw it and you lived with him and he was one of you, how come you rejected him? So they came up with this theory. Mm-hmm. Nah, you see what? They're not really people. They're really the children of the devil, and that's why they rejected Jesus. And then Judaism overcame this. Christianity overcame this. So this is nothing. There's not an original syllable in anything that he has written. I mean, this is 2,000 years of polemic against the Jews in order to justify why they were early church fathers. Many of them, not all of them, were anti-Semitic. And this is if you want to look for a source in institutional anti-Semitism. I'm not talking about personal anti-Semitism that preceded the church, but institutional anti-Semitism. Look right there. That's your best argument for when the church institutionalized anti-Semitism and made it part and parcel of a greater agenda.
One of the things that I thought was interesting that I never realized before until I read through Paul's letters is, this idea that there was a new covenant in general, right? And Paul makes an argument that there is the Abrahamic covenant that God made with the Jewish people, then a new covenant with Moses, right, in the desert when he gave the Torah. And then this was like a third Jesus was the embodiment of a third covenant, and the Jews were like left out of that covenant. We weren't part of that, and I never really understood that. And this was almost a redoing of the Abrahamic covenant.
Of course, they had to. This is their justification,
right?
I mean, for it. I mean, it's ironic because Paul was Jewish. So what do you mean the Jews are not part of it? And the early church before Paul showed up, James and Peter only exclusively wanted to proselytize to Jews and argued that Christians needed to convert to Judaism in order to be saved by Jesus. So it's very ironic to say right now, go back and let's redo the first quarter of the game and let's just cut out the Jews when the whole church was Jewish in the beginning. There's no such thing as a Gentile church. Only later on, when they figured, hey, you know what? There's more business in Idaho than there is in Borough Park. Oh, okay. You know what? Let's pick up and go to Idaho or Utah, if you know what I'm talking about. There's more business in Utah than in the Catskills. Okay, so we're moving to Utah. So it's very ironic, looking back now and how they played it. Now it would have been just a matter of pure intellectual discussion if it wouldn't have caught on, but it did catch on.
Right.
I mean that's the mystery of this, that it did, and he was not the only person that claimed to be the Messiah. Don't forget there was a huge messianic fervor going on at the time of Herod's reign and post Herod's reign till the destruction of the temple 70 years later. But now this one caught on, and I think primarily because of Paul and Paul's departure from the original idea of just proselytizing to the Jews and coming. He was king of the Jews. Didn't they call Jesus king of the Jews? He figured there's more business out there. I mean, there's maybe a couple of million Jews and there's tens of millions of Gentiles.
Yeah.
So and this was actually the first, I believe. I mean, I could be wrong, but this was actually the first. When I say Catholic, I don't mean the Catholic Church. I mean Catholic in the sense of universal. This was the first universal endeavor, meaning that everyone had to believe in this. Judaism never believed in that. Judaism believed you have to believe in one God, but everyone has different paths. Jews have one path, Gentiles have a different path. They may lead to the same God, but we have different functions. This was the first Catholic campaign that everyone in the world, whether you're Chinese or you live in Buenos Aires, it doesn't matter. Jesus came to save the world. Gives you a tremendous amount of people to proselytize to. You can be anywhere. You can be a missionary in the deep dark, jungles of Africa and proselytize. You could be in Australia and proselytize. So it was a brilliant move on his part, marketing wise.
So there was one other point I want to make about this this tweet that I thought was very strange, and specifically it was the part about Christianity is not rooted in Judaism; it overcame it, and right. I think it's such it. And if you have early church doctrine saying that, it's one thing, but to live in the year 2024 and having all of history behind us now, and seeing what's happened, a couple things that just popped into my mind was in Walter Russell Mead's new book, The Ark of a Covenant, he talks about how when the settlers came over from England originally, they were all Puritans or other sects of Catholicism and of Christianity, right? Sorry, I don't want to make that mistake. Dan does not like when I make that mistake.
Dan will be furious.
This whole conversation is going to to kill Dan.
Yes, that's true. It's true.
Kill him.
But
no, but we're not disparaging Christianity.
No.
We're disparaging the guy that.
But so in the book he writes about how when they came over from England, they were New Testament guys, but they realized that as they were trying to set up this new society, the New Testament really wasn't sufficient for that, because the New Testament is essentially a book about a person, whoever that person, it's about a person, whereas the Old Testament is about the creation and operation of a society, essentially, amongst other things. But that's a large part of it is, developing a new society. And so they ended up leveraging the Old Testament quite a bit to help them figure out, what should this new society look like. And that's one of the ways the Old Testament started to become more in fashion in the Americas, is because of that leveraging of the Old Testament to help them. The other thing that popped in my mind, and it just sort of more anecdotally, is that you have all of these debates, less so now, but certainly in the past, about do we put up the 10 Commandments in public places and in schools? And the first thing that popped into my mind was they weren't doing that for the Jewish people. And I'm fairly certain the 10 Commandments don't come from the same book that Jesus comes from.
That's for sure.
That's right.
Listen.
So
there's an old expression. It says like this: "Kol hameitzer b'Yisrael na'aseh rosh." Anyone that agitates the Jewish people immediately gets elevated to a position of authority. He becomes popular. That's it. It was true 2,000 years ago. It was true 1,500 years ago. It was true 1,000 years ago. If you want an enemy and you want to gain popularity, go after the Jews. They're an easy target. We've always been a minority. We'll always be a minority. The Torah says so. God chose us not because we're the most populous, because we are small and dedicated. That's why he chose us. So I'm not surprised that idiots like this guy will, pick and choose, and it's like a salad. You only put in there what you want. You leave out the rest. So he becomes popular. People follow him. I mean, just take this. The same thing is true with this new wave of anti-Semitism. Yeah, everybody's talking about these people now,
right,
because they're making outrageous statements about the Jews, as if they themselves came up with this brilliant idea that the Jews are different and Judaism is different and this and that and that and that. And all of a sudden, wow, they woke up and the country is awash with this amazement and wonderment that these geniuses have just come up. They win the Nobel Prize in creativity. It's an age-old age-old marketing tool.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get popularity, go out against the Jews.